Ladies and gentlemen, I'm excited. This is why my thumbnail has me going like, I got the book today. Yes, that's right. This is everything that Dennis R. MacDonald, who is the scholar I have here on the screen with me, has done in one book. And you won't believe the cost. So right now, Dennis R. MacDonald, welcome back to Myth Vision Podcast. How are you, my friend?
Oh, thank you, Derek. Merry Christmas to one atheist to another.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hey, I love it. This is the season that I enjoy. I'm not used to the snow that I'm getting right now, but we just need new tires on our vehicle because it's definitely sliding whenever we're trying to drive. We got to be careful.
Be careful.
Absolutely. So in this book, I want everybody to know this honestly is a game changer for New Testament studies. Everybody's used to looking at the Hebrew Bible or taking things that may not be history and like making so much history out of it instead of like maybe considering it's literary and then maybe seeing if there's a historical kernel to that. But they just kind of run with it sometimes. And New Testament studies isn't looking at the Greek connections like you do. Can you tell us a little bit about this work? What makes this, you actually on page 4, describe what makes this work unique. And you very meticulously go through each section to describe it. But in your own words, for a general audience, not an academic one, why is this such an important work for people who are studying?
Derek, I like to think of it as the most important book on the Gospels written in the 21st century and maybe ever. And I know that's an inflated judgment.
Yeah.
But we have been tone deaf to the influence of the most important literature for social identity and religion in Greek antiquity, namely the Homeric epics. Mm-hmm. And in second place would probably be the Athenian tragedies, and in third place would be the Socratic dialogues of Plato. And very seldom have scholars made parallels between gospel stories and that literature. They'll do so generically to the myths of the Greeks and to Greek philosophy, but not to what scholars call, and in ancient rhetoricians called, mimesis. And related to mimesis or literary imitation is the notion of syncrisis, that is a comparison of one hero with another to show that your hero or in-group leader is superior to others. And I've been working on this project for 20 years and have published about half a dozen or more books and dozens of articles on this topic. And this is the distillation of that work, as you said. So it doesn't include everything I've done on it, but it includes the most important parts. What it does include is every word of the Gospels is translated into English and placed in parallel columns, either with the Synoptics or with the Gospel of John in its 3 different editions. It also includes most of the narratives of the Acts of the Apostles and compares them serially with Homer's Iliad, then the Odyssey, then Euripides' Bacchae to show that Paul is a Dionysian character, and then finally the Socratic dialogues of Plato to show that Paul is a philosopher much like Socrates. The Gospel of John is an extended imitation of Euripides' Bacchae to show that Jesus is superior to the god of wine. Now, the book that we have here actually has 3 volumes in it.
So it's 3 books technically in one.
Okay, and what I want to do is to do this with you, since you have a copy there. I'll read from the top of the page on the cover.
Okay.
And then when I stop, you read what comes next.
Got it.
All right.
Okay.
So the title is Synopses of Epic, Tragedy, and the Gospels. By epic, I mean not just the Homeric epics, but also Vergil's Aeneid. By tragedy, I mean primarily the plays of Euripides, but also some of Aeschylus and one of Sophocles. And so here's volume 1, a mimetic synopsis of 4 synoptic gospels. Those gospels are Q plus, that is my reconstruction of Q, then Mark, then Matthew, and Luke in parallel columns, and that's in sequential order. And that includes every word and pericope of the synoptic gospels, including Q. So you read the next line.
So you talking about the imitations of Deuteronomy? Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Imitations of Deuteronomy, Homer, and Athenian tragedies.
And often in order to engage Vergil's Aeneid and his own imitations of Greek poetry, in order to give an identity to the emerging Roman Empire under Augustus. Volume 2 is a mimetic syncrisis, that is a comparison of the Acts of the Apostles. And so you can read the next line.
Imitations of Homer and Euripides and rivalry with the Aeneid.
Volume 3 is a mimetic synopsis of 3 Gospels of John, and that's because the Gospel of John probably was composed in 3 distinct stages, and one can actually compare the stages. So you can read the next.
Imitations of the Synoptics and Euripides' Bacchae.
Right, and they show the cover picture. Yeah. It's of a scribe. This is a 12th century illuminated manuscript of the Gospel of Luke. And I love it because he's actually copying something, right? He's rewriting something. It might as well be mimesis, but it probably is more scribal than that. On the back of the book, Derek, I just want to read one
of the
endorsement. And this comes from Christine de Troyer, who's secretary of the European Academy of Sciences and Arts and has a position in Hebrew Bible at the University of Salzburg in Austria. Can you read that?
Yeah.
If there is one scholar.
Yep. If there's one scholar who has opened our eyes to the evangelist and other early Christian authors imitating classical literature, it is Dennis MacDonald. The 3 volumes that comprise Synopses of Epic, Tragedy, and the Gospels are the result of a lifelong stellar research into direct and strategic imitations of classical poetry, especially Homer, Vergil, and Euripides. More profoundly, here he abundantly demonstrates the literary indebtedness of the evangelist to texts not written by Jews or Christians, and thereby shows that he has been way ahead of his time. These volumes are indispensable for anyone studying the New Testament within its Hellenistic Roman context.
And there are other endorsements on the back page, and I'm so gratified that scholars like Christine de Troyer and others, and a certain Derek Lambrick is also on board, thinking that this is an important work. Now, I want to say one more thing, Derek, about it, if I might. This is not a book necessarily to read through. It's more like a telephone book. We may remember telephone books from the past. A telephone book or an encyclopedia with an important introduction. So the way to handle the book for most of your listeners is going to be to read the first 20 pages. Mm-hmm. Some of the pages situate this project in the context of the methodology without going into the methodology or justifying the reconstruction of Q. But it also has a general conclusion. The conclusion gives an overview of what one will find in the volume and a defense of mimesis criticism against the Academy. and why there's such resistance to it in the church and the academy. So after one reads that, then I think you just dabble into the book, find a story you like, find a sermon you're going to preach from with a text or Sunday school or an argument that you're going to do on YouTube, and just explore it and make your own judgment. By the way, this is not intended to be MacDonald's argument against anybody. It's intended to be an alternative way of situating early Christian literature in its context and to have the reader make judgments about what that means. In some cases, people will want to say, well, it's just in the air. These myths are so pervasive that you don't have to have visual contact. Right. Sometimes other people will say, oh, no, the author knows it, but the reader doesn't. And others will say, as I do, that in fact, the reader and the author both know of these stories. And by comparing them, one sees that they're attempting to make Jesus or Peter or Paul or whatever superior to the others. Now, this is, so anyway, that's basically what the book is trying to do.
I have to jump in here and say, along with Derek Lambert of Myth Vision YouTube channel, whoever that guy is, leaving a blurb, above that, you have Robin Faith Walsh. And for those who've watched my channel, she has a radical, very taken serious position in academia right now about looking at the origins of gospel literature. And she writes in here, and those who've watched my YouTube channel have most likely come across Robin's work, MacDonald's synopsis of epic tragedy in the Gospels is brilliant for its simple premise that early Christian writers were in conversation, even competition, with the canons of Greek and Latin literature. The result is an ambitious and deeply impressive re-examination of our long-held assumptions about Roman book culture, the synoptic problem, and the so-called historical Jesus. These volumes are essential reading for anyone seeking clarity on the social and literary development of the Jesus movement. And of course, in mine, I might as well read mine since I'm super proud of you even sticking it in there. I didn't know if you would or wouldn't. Dennis MacDonald's scholarship is a groundbreaking achievement for the entire field of gospel studies. More than anyone I have read, he has mined classical Greek literature and narrative models that could have informed the composition of the Gospels, and thus the entire history of narratives about Jesus. In my podcast, I have wholeheartedly recommended his books to viewers, and many of them join me in eagerly anticipating the culmination of this insights in Synopses of Epic, Tragedy in the Gospels. As one viewer put it, one day, MacDonald will be recognized as the Charles Darwin of modern gospel scholarship. And I think that your work is going to blow the lid off. Most people who watch my channel, I'd say most, if I were to gauge, will want to use this work as kind of a debunk for fundamentalism. And I encourage it. I'll say it like this. I had a recent scholar come on to defend the Quran, right? And you could almost take it like he was trying to do an apologetic, but he said, as a Muslim, but he's very liberal and he's a scholar at Harvard, right? He said, look, I think that the Muslim exegetes in the medieval period were wrong. The way they interpreted Muhammad, they had him gradually become more aggressive throughout history. At the end, it was all game, get a sword and kill any non-believer or anyone who's not a Muslim. That's kind of the development you see. There's like a 4-stage jihad development, right? He said, I think that's totally wrong. Let's get back to the Quran. Let's examine the Quran and see what the Quran says. This is what he did. And at the end of the episode, I don't know what's true here, Dennis, but it made me go, maybe Muslims who were in power eventually as their empire grew were manipulating the Quran to fit their political agenda. And so I go back to the Gospels. I go back to New Testament literature, and I wonder, are we seeing the same problem? Are fundamentalists reading this literature and taking it literal and taking it in ways that really the authors themselves never intended them to be understood? And I talked to your good friend yesterday. You didn't expect me to bring this up, but Richard C. Miller, as soon as you flip into the inside of the page, who's part of the editorial board for Mimesis Press, and of course this publication especially, I spoke to Richard C. Miller about doing some work with him in the future, and he said, the only problem with Dennis is not his work, It's he's too nice. You're too nice. So, you know, this tool is not an apologetic. This tool, I'll say, your work, can be used by both camps.
That's right.
It can be used by anyone who really wants to get a grasp. But if your bubble, if your worldview is not ready to see the Greek world, you're going to either pop that bubble or you're going to want to ignore this literature, because this right here absolutely changes the game. Sorry, there's my vent.
The analogy with Islam is, I think, okay, but I would want to be more generous. See, I'm a nice guy. I'd like to be more generous to both sides.
Right.
That is, as the history of Islam grew, it faced new challenges from outsiders, and often leadership in religious groups ossify and reify their tradition in order to make it more holy and more correct and more justifiable to defend themselves against outsiders. I think what happens in the Christian tradition is that when the center of the Christian church became more Roman and Western European than Orthodox, people no longer understood Homer. In fact, the Homeric epics were lost in the West for centuries. In Byzantium, people still read their Gospels and read Homer, and they read them together. And we have several examples of this in the Gospel of Nicodemus, but most spectacularly in the Homericentones, the Homeric centos. So I don't think what happens in the Christian church was entirely mean-spirited. I think it had to do with cultural shifts. And so what we have in the Guild in the West is a buildup of an amazing library of resources, of textual critical work, of lexica, of commentaries, and so on. But they're coming out of the Western tradition, and they have lost the importance of the Homeric epics and the Athenian tragedy. Furthermore, Homeric Greek and Euripidean Greek are difficult for people who learn Greek as koine, or even classical Greek literature. This is archaic Greek literature, and most scholars are not equipped in order to translate it and to understand it. So there are a number of understandable reasons, both in scholarship and in the church, and in Western culture generally, for having amnesia about the Homeric epics. And if you don't know those epics, you can't compare them. So what happens in the West then is people compare these stories either to the Hebrew Bible or imaginary historical truth, so that the disciples have memories of Jesus doing this and walking on water and visiting the dead and rising from the dead and so on, instead of seeing these as self-conscious fictions to create for early Christians to create their hero as superior to those of the culture around them, especially to make Jesus a more compassionate and powerful character.
Right.
So I think we need to be generous in the history of interpretation, but when we're generous, we have to understand, as you do, that history is tragic. It has losses. It has amnesia. And what I'd like to think is this book that is available on Amazon for $31.
I forgot to bring that up. Yeah, it's massive too. I mean, this is a very big resource. Please continue. I had just...
No, it's for $31. And if people wish to help this cause, it would help, obviously, to buy the book and to show it about. But it also would be important to have some positive reviews of the book on the Amazon listing. Unfortunately, at this point, the only place where you can get copies of the book are through Amazon or through me.
And there's colored pictures, just so people know.
There are
You actually kept those.
20 color images. Yeah.
Yeah. This is amazing because you actually go in so there's a picture. I feel like I need to hunt this picture down. It is on hold on, my camera's in the way. So bear with me. I've got pictures of you that I feel like are worthy of bringing up. When I was over there in the cabin with you, we actually did, I guess you'd say, a ton of recording at the desk, and you had your kind of rough draft that you've tweaked quite a bit since then on the table during our recordings. And to show people, like, this goes back, he's been working on this for quite some time, and even then he was excited. You can see Dennis here at the table. We recorded some videos there. It was me and Richard Carrier and him at that weekend. We spent time, and that synopsis, I still have that folder you sent me. This is even thicker. It has more work. And anyway, I had to do a little plug there with you at the table, already working on this a while back. And finally, you get it out here. I've heard many scholars say this is going to be a great tool for them when they go to research. But one thing I found unique also in your book, and you find this out when you're reading the very beginning, is you actually translate things. Not only are there interpretations and mimetic connections you won't find anywhere. Like, I'm trying to say, like, you can't find this. You can go look, you can go read, you can find all the library books you want. There is unique material that only Dennis MacDonald has worked on and that has shown, and your translations of some things that you're using to try and come up with comparative.
Everything of an ancient text I translate myself, including Homer. And so you won't get another version of Homer like mine. And it preserves the line breaks in the original so that the line numbers in my translation are identical to the ones in the critical edition. And also the Homeric centones and some of the Gospel of Nicodemus. And I'm talking about several hundred lines of text you won't find translated anywhere. I do have one favor to ask of you, Derek.
Yeah.
I want you to turn to page 279.
Okay. Which is like halfway through the book.
Yeah, almost exactly halfway.
Okay.
And you see the picture on the top?
Yes, sir. Oh, there it is.
Okay, your viewers may know the curious story about a young man who runs off naked at Jesus's arrest.
Yes.
There's an ancient picture of him. This is Elpenor, whose soul is coming out of the netherworld to greet Odysseus, and he's depicted nude because it's a picture of his soul that's deprived of its body. And so the huge debate that still rages about who is this young man, is it the author, is it whatever, has an easy Homeric solution. It's Elpenor. And there you have a picture of him.
Wow. Wow. Do you know when this is dated, this vase or vase?
Yeah, I do. It's 5th century BCE.
If I may, just to read this little part, Elpenor emerges from Hades to greet Odysseus, who has just slain sheep and drained their blood into a pit, attract the souls of the dead. Elpenor's nudity symbolizes his soul, as you just said, 5th century. But then you say in Odyssey 11, Elpenor's soul emerges from Hades and begs Odysseus to honor him with funeral rites befitting a hero. I mean, Jesus is literally at a tomb who dies, right? And they're supposed to come and honor him at his tomb.
There's a young man in the tomb,
right,
who witnesses to the resurrection. That's the Elpenor character again.
At the beginning of the book 12, and at dawn, Odysseus dutifully buries his young comrade's body back at Circe's island. His construction of a barrow with a stele resembles the memorial shrines of Homeric heroes, but instead of a weapon of war, Elpenor sworded a servile symbol, his oar. In other words, Elpenor is an anti-hero, a syncrisis to Odysseus. This is exhaustive. This is like, get your cup of coffee, your cup of tea, your caffeine, whatever it is that gets you going, and get ready to rock and roll and go deep. I plan on so let's tease some people here, Dennis. Not only do they need to get the book for $31 on Amazon right now, helping you to hit more number ones on Amazon. Let me show where you're at right now, because you actually, for those who don't know, already have the number one new release in the New Testament criticism and interpretation. So your book right now is statused as number one new release in New Testament criticism and interpretation. More people buy it. We'll keep it up on the number one list, and Amazon will help promote it. Leave Amazon reviews. It'll keep helping that. So you don't have to read the whole thing. Remember, this is a tool. This is a study guide, so to speak. But drop a comment on Amazon about how Dennis MacDonald's work has helped reshape or help form your thinking in studies of the Bible. That will help this book get more attention. Get you a copy right now, $30.94 on Amazon. And do they have an ebook version coming out, Dennis? Or
there will be an ebook version, but I'm told to wait until we get some other
Paperback
purchases and see what the market looks like. I do want to say one more thing about it, though, Derek. I feel so privileged in my long lifetime now to have spent so much time on what I consider to be one of the two corpora that are most important for shaping Western culture. That is Greek poetry and philosophy and the Gospels. And both of them have issued in so much art and music and liturgy and religion. And one of the things that I hope the book can do is to make people thrilled by the Greek literature as well as the Christian literature. This is not a Christian apologetic, but it's not a Greek apologetic either. It's trying to say that we have these two creative and imaginative corpora that have served the West so beautifully in shaping identity and art and music and so on, that I think your viewers are going to be wiser on both scores, not just on religion, but on art, on this poetry, which is so powerful.
I think you're right. And I think more people can respect the literature for what it is.
That's right.
Even if there has been a traumatic or a bad experience within the church, which a lot of people who watch my channel have had that.
Yeah, I have.
Or they've been abused in some way due to it. And it's like, hey, let's look at this literature for what it is, and don't let people's dogmas about it tell you how to view the literature. So you're actually, in a sense, if I can be fair to you, maybe you don't like the term apologist, but I like the idea of saying you're defending the text, you're defending the literature, and not as much, obviously, what comes with that baggage through history and the dogmas that people have, created. But it's like, once you understand what Dennis is doing, it's artwork. It really is. It's an artwork of its own. It's really fun and awesome to see how I would say they mythologize this man. Others might have different takes, but comparing that to other heroes and other figures in history, what really still gets me and is a shocker is how they made this guy, this apocalyptic rabbi, into this heroic tale. It's just really, really impressive to me. Can we tease our audience real quick, Dennis, and then we'll go to Q&A when you're ready. But you're coming up here to Washington in January.
Yeah.
And what I hope to do with you is take questions from Patreon members who help support Myth Vision.
Yeah, great.
Answering their questions pertaining to your work and your research. Also, we're going to be recording a course. And in that course, college level course, you're going to make a case or present mimesis criticism from the ground up so that anyone can really learn this. They don't have to go to Harvard. They don't have to go to Yale. They don't have to go to Oxford. Affordable, at home, from their screens, on their computers or phones or whatever. They can purchase the course at an affordable rate and learn going through your mimesis and what you're trying to do. And then obviously, if it whets their appetite, because you're going to have reading recommendations, I hope this book makes it into that reading recommendation, because it's going to
No,
be.
that's it would really help people who are interested in the class to have by that time a copy of the synopses. So we don't have to worry about handouts and so on. We can't do that on a Zoom course
Right.
in any case. So yeah.
Yeah, I just figure it tease people, letting them know like this is what's coming up in January, and then we will be putting that course together. People can actually learn what you're doing. I think we're making inroads into academia, unlike it was before. When I first met you, you voiced, you had kind of a, I don't mean this bad, like a pessimistic outlook, because you were like, just like almost like, almost give up. Like, it's like, is it ever going to do anything? I know my work is valuable. I know what I'm looking at is the case. I like, once I see it, I can't unsee it. But the guild, as you've coined the phrase and it's stuck in my head, they're not willing to check it out. Since I first met you, this is what was going on. Since then, how far do you feel your work has made inroads into the guild?
I think people understand that I am a pioneer, but pioneers are marginal and they're not settlers. And I think what's happening is people are waiting for the pioneer or the groundbreaker to to, to deal with the discoveries, and then people are going to settle in. And I think there's a certain amount of settling in. I think we need a few more pioneers, though, still, because you mentioned Richard Miller. He certainly is one. And other people that you've had on your broadcast have been pioneers in their own way. So that's what we need now. And then we'll see how it settles in. By the way, it's really important for people to know that although I'm a theoskeptic, I'm not against religion. I'm against bad religion and I'm against stupid religion. And my contribution in this book is getting rid of really stupid and a stupid religion and people who are not educated in the same kind of education that these authors had. And their faith, I would trust to be wiser and stronger because of exposure to something like this. We may not belong to the same church, but I think we belong to the same planet, and we belong to Western culture, and we can be wiser in understanding how the Christian movement emerged, Judaism too, out of this common culture.
Wow. Okay. A lot there. I do see a lot of stupid religion out there. And so
Yeah.
I'm hoping to make a change as well. I've said it before. I don't care to make everybody atheist. I don't care to make everybody like me. I understand that some people just think the world and the order of things in their mind makes better sense, that something's behind it all. But at the end of the day, what I see going on in the abuse of ours is right. You're going to cook in a mythological Hades, by the way. You're going to die and melt and burn and torture and suffer. Get out of my face with that nonsense, because this is just not only horrible as an ideology, but or a thought, that people are teaching. I know it because of my own experience and my mother still to this day. But we see it for what it is. It's the way that maybe some people did see the world, but it was also very artistic and justice and the way that they would write things. I'm so fascinated with this. So I know as I go along, we'll be doing videos when you come here, but eventually I'll be doing specific videos covering connections to the Gospels and Greek literature, giving you the mythology, if you will, the legend, the narratives behind what's going on, and so we could start to popularize. I ask right now, before we go to Q&A, everybody who's watching, if you know somebody who's into this stuff, like weirdos like me, on Myth Vision, who love to study this stuff, get them this for Christmas. Help out. It helps put this on the map. It will start helping to make a change in academia, and of course, getting other people to see the comparison to the Greek world. It's only $31. It's big and it's heavy and it's nice. So
and it won't be 31 bucks for long.
that's
The
right.
list price is going to be $46. So they chopped a third of the price off of the book.
Wow. So $45.74 is what it will be. And right now you're saving $14.80 if you get it now. Okay, go get the book, please. And Dennis, we got a lot of work to do before you have your apotheosis, you know. Before you have your apotheosis and are up there on Mount Olympus or heaven, whichever one you prefer. As your grandson might say, Mount Olympus he'd prefer, but he'll behave like the Christian. So
okay, no, look, I'm just a beggar who found a loaf of bread, and I can't eat all the bread, so I want to share it with other people who are hungry. So I'm not on Mount Olympus, and there are mistakes in the book, I'm quite sure, and so that's what happens with pioneering work.
Yeah.
Then people have to come but I just feel so fortunate to have found some things that I think are going to be useful to people. They certainly are to me.
Yeah, there's someone in the chat said earlier, I don't think making an equivocation to Charles Darwin is good because a lot of things he said are wrong. And the point about being a pioneer is that, we hope that students after you can chisel out a more clearer picture of what's going on, but they have a lot of work cut out for them because the linguistic hurdle that has to be jumped to Homeric Greek, all the way to finding out how these authors who wrote the Gospels learned this Greek, understood these narratives in order to even write Greek at all. They took school, they had classes that taught them how to write what we see as the Gospels, learning this literature. So it's a lot of work to try and figure all this out. And I'm hoping that students I imagine it might be some crossover classicists like Robin Walsh or like Richard C. Miller or people like that are going to be the ones who are really going to capitalize on this.
Yeah,
that's what I
guess that's right. Yeah, but for your readers, I'm an old hockey coach, and when you teach youngsters how to skate and play hockey, you have to show them how to fall and fail, because if a skater is afraid to fall, they'll never be a good hockey player, because hockey requires falling and getting up and dusting off. I consider myself a very young hockey player, and yes, I fall. And other people are going to be better off if they're willing to use their imaginations and their judgment to get out there and that's what you've done, and you've had falls yourself.
I still do.
Yeah, and so you just get up, pick yourself up, and skate hard, and someday you're going to win the Stanley Cup.
I hope so. Yeah. Well, look, you heard the prophecy, so I believe it's true. Get the book. Now we're going to Q&A. Please share this out there. Let's get this thing going. Get it in all of the circles out there, Christian circles, skeptical circles. I mean, this can be used in many directions.
Yeah.
But the one thing I think it's going to do inevitably is really pop the bubble of fundamentalist interpretation. So you need this. I don't care where you're at. In fact, my liberal Christian friends to watch Myth Vision, and there are some who support me on Patreon, like that love what I do. And they've written me in private, hey, I am a Christian. I'm liberal. Like I'm not an inerrantist or an infallibility type of Christian. I love what you do. I disagree with your ontology at the end of the day, and it doesn't hurt me one way or the other, but I love what you're doing. And they back this kind of stuff. So we need more of them pioneering this into their circles, because their circles, the fundamentalists are not listening to me. Most of them aren't, unless someone's on the fence of doubt. They're probably not watching Myth Vision. And so we need the Christians to take this and say, hey, my tradition is more beautiful than you are giving it credit. Stop making it ugly. Check out the art, the Greek world. Let's pierce into this stuff and understand they were
beautifully put. Beautifully put. Yeah, beautifully put.
Thank you, Dennis, for joining me. Doc Pleuromonaut. The Gospel of Nicodemus articulates ransom theory as the harrowing being the decisive moment for salvation rather than Jesus' death. But was the Synopsis an amalgam of earlier works like Blathmuck?
I don't know what blacksmith is, Doctor.
Blathmuck? I don't know.
I don't know what that is. I'm going to try to make a very complex problem simple. The Gospel of Nicodemus probably was first composed in the late 4th century. It had a number of recensions that were later, and some of those later recensions include the De Sensus Christi. The De Sensus Christi survives primarily in Latin, although I understand there have been attempts to write, to restore the Greek text of the De Sensus. The De Sensus is Christ going into the netherworld and emptying it of everyone who was there. So I suppose that's what Dr. Pleroma Naut has in mind as a ransom theory.
Blathmuck was an Irish poet.
Oh, glad to know it. I don't think the De Sensus Christi was a composite, but I think it was an imitation based on the myth of in Plato, where a youngster goes to the netherworld and sees what's going on there and comes back and says, you better watch out. Santa Claus is coming to town. Or that is, you're going to you suffer in Hades. The fascinating thing about the De Sensus is that Jesus, or the Christ, empties Hades altogether except for Satan. Satan is the only one who is in Hades. In other words, it's a form of Christian universalism, apparently. There's nobody in Hades. Everybody is in paradise. So I don't think that's so much a ransom theory, but it's a kind of a liberation of the dead, the harrowing of the, and of course then we have medieval art and literature and so on that exploits that theme.
Christian Universalists are going to watch you and love you after hearing that. John,
well, it's part of the tradition. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Origin and others. John Matcher, forgive me if I butcher your last name there. Thank you for being a member and your super chat. Which emulation from Homer used in the gospel did you first notice that sparked your interest in this subject? Which emulation is your most favorite? Imitation, let's say. Which one?
I think those are two questions, and I can tell you what first sparked my interest, but then I can tell you what my favorite one is. What first sparked my interest is that Jesus sails on a boat with a crew that are nincompoops that can't suffer the same way he does. And he has to face his fate alone once he gets back into Ithaca. So even ancients thought that putting Jesus on the Sea of Galilee and pretending that it's the Mediterranean and walking on water and all of that was mysterious. Any reader of the Odyssey would understand that Odysseus is traveling with his crew. They botch up, so he has to face his fate alone. The gods walk on water and so on. So all of a sudden there are these epic pieces that are falling together. But then when Jesus gets to Jerusalem, he's got foes who are going to kill him, and Jesus has to keep his identity a secret in the Gospel of Mark so they don't kill him. Mm-hmm. So it's really this major characterization, not particularly episodes. I suppose my favorite emulation may be either the Gerasene demoniac and the Polyphemus story, where you also have Circe in there insofar as she changes soldiers into swine and then those soldiers later drown, which is pretty remarkable. But I also find the extensive parallels between the death of Hector and the death of Jesus, that is, the death of Jesus in the Gospel of Mark and the death of Hector at the end of the Iliad, to be so striking that one has to acknowledge a comparison. So, for example, the scandalous statement of Jesus, my God, why have you forsaken me?" is nearly a paraphrase of Hector realizing that Deiphobus, his brother, is not going to come to his rescue, and the gods have abandoned him. In fact, there's the same word is used for abandonment, lipo, so to leave and so on. So I guess
that's eclectic too. That's borrowing from Psalms 22, but also utilizing the narrative of Homer or Hector.
And I call that mimetic hybridity.
Okay.
And that was actually taught in schools, of how to use multiple models in order to create something more beautiful. So there you have it.
Great question.
Yeah,
And I always enjoy when you go into that and like explain these things in detail, because I rewatched Troy with my wife the other night, and I was just like, they didn't do enough. They didn't go long enough. They didn't get into the details enough. There was just not enough there. But when Hector died, and Hector's father comes at night, literally at night again, beseeching Achilles, and he begs. I mean, that was a good scene. I have to give him credit, because he begs and says, like, please let me bury an honorable burial for my son.
That's right.
And it was it had me about teared up. I was like, oh snap, this is intense. So
okay, let me go one step further.
All right, I got you hyped.
Okay, the Priam character, that is Hector's father, right, is played in the Gospel of Mark by someone who's named what?
Joseph of Arimathea.
Joseph of Arimathea. What's the name of Jesus's father?
Joseph. Yeah. So
is that an accident?
I doubt it is. I've thought about that too. I was thinking about that before I even mentioned this. While you were saying what you were saying, I was thinking about that, because you've said it before. Is it coincidence that Joseph and Joseph of Arimathea share the same first name? And there are scholars, I'm curious to know statistics like of what we found of that. How common is the name Joseph? I mean, you like to know different things, right? But the fact that a Joseph goes at night goes to Pontius Pilate to try and get the body.
And Simon Peter says he'll carry Jesus's cross, but it's Simon of Cyrene who does so. James and John want to be at Jesus's right hand in his glory. When Jesus dies, two thieves, one on his right and one on his left, are there. It's the same wording. It's not Mary of Nazareth who weeps for her son, but it's two other Marys who come to the tomb and prepare for it. So these symbolic names are really important.
This is why you tell me you're not sure some of them existed in history, and I'm always interested in hearing more. Paul Kickling, thank you for the super chat. But isn't Greek tragedy based on real life psychology? Aren't you arguing something? Is it Wittgenstein answered? Wittgenstein. Life reflects art, like man is in image of God.
Well, yes. The Greek tragedies are so heavily psychological, and that's why they were so powerful, because they matched human experience. But I don't think what I'm arguing is an early Wittgenstein way of understanding mythology and the psychology of myth. Rather, these texts became standardized and used in education and for cultural identity. So I think that the issue of art and religion becomes really the art of how religious groups identify themselves culturally. so that one finds, for example, in the Bacchae, a glorification of Dionysus, who's a total jerk. And he punishes a whole city because they slighted his mother Semele, and so on. So, Paul, this is a very interesting question of how one matches the origin of literature with its reception. So I would say you're right about the origin of Greek tragedy and that it's deeply psychological. But I would say its reception in among Jews and Christians is also important. But it's not as psychological as it is sociological.
Interesting. Paul, great question. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Doc Pluromanotic getting in the house with an amazing question. Peter describes the eschaton as the time of universal restoration, Acts 3:21. Could Luke be using utopian golden age myths like Vergil as a familiar vehicle for this, a restoration of the blessedness of the human race?
Absolutely. Yes, yes, yes.
Wow.
And in fact, you can see that by the end of the Acts of the Apostles, the kingdom of God, Paul is proclaiming the kingdom of God in Rome. And there's going to be a restoration of sorts. That is, that Jews and Christians are both going to be able to be together, but to create a new community. One of the people you've had on, Derek, Michael Kochenash, has written 2 wonderful articles on what Dr. Pluromanotic is talking about as a utopian golden age myth, like in Vergil's Aeneid or elsewhere in Vergil.
Right.
Yes, in fact, Luke Acts is competing with that and arguing that golden age is in fact going to be the kingdom of God in the future.
Thank you, Doc. Great question. Getting to the next one here. Sudia, forgive me if I butcher that. You mentioned Homeric Greek can be a barrier to religious scholarship in this area. Do scholars of Homeric literature ever discuss the Gospels, or is the Koine Greek sometimes also a barrier for them?
That's a great question. I'm not aware of Homeric scholars who discuss the Gospels because there's a certain amount of cultural arrogance, I have to say, among some classicists, especially when they're dealing with such esoteric and archaic material. They have so much material that they have to plow through. The textual critical issues, the archaeological issues, the nature of warfare and agriculture and other literature and reception. So the Gospels are hardly on their radar. But Koine Greek is not going to be a barrier for them, because what happens with most of them is that they learn Koine Greek first, and then they branch out into Homeric Greek. Now, there are some exceptions, especially in Europe, where people learn Homeric Greek first. But the move from archaic Greek to Koine is considerably easier than it is in the other direction, largely because Homeric Greek has such an enormous vocabulary and so many words that appear only once or just a few times, so much so that a scholar we call Apollonius Sophista had to write a lexicon in Koine for Homeric Greek because people simply couldn't read it. But you wouldn't have to have that in the opposite direction, because by the time the Homeric Greek, we just don't, the times chronologies would be different. But that's a very good question.
So it is fair to say, though, just briefly, that people who are learned Greek, Koine Greek in New Testament studies, there's definitely a barrier if they haven't learned Homeric Greek. That we've talked about that before. We're trying to grasp what's going on in the Homeric Odyssey, Iliad. There's a big gap.
And to be fair to biblical scholarship, these scholars have plowed very much into the Greek, let's say Philo or Josephus or the people, the Greek writings more or less contemporary.
Hmm.
But the fact that Homeric Greek is so much older and comes out of a different culture has encouraged them to put it in second place, I guess.
Thank you so much for that. Chris McCarthy has an interesting question, and thank you for the support. Do you think that cover the subject Greek myths should include stories about Jesus?
That cover the subject Greek.
You know how people say,
Oh, yeah. I get it. I haven't thought about that, Chris. Um, I I think we need to talk more about what the Germans call the Nachleben, the afterlife of the Greek culture. I usually think it in terms of the Greek epics, of the Homeric epics and tragedy.
mhm.
Why we have so little in popular writing about the reception of that among Jews and Christians. But yeah, the subject of Greek myths, that's fascinating.
Yeah,
I think that's worthy of thinking about.
yeah. If we're already, I mean, I know that David Little wrote specifically like seeing Jesus as a Greek hero in the Mediterranean, like viewing him that way. And if that's the case, should he be categorized among Greek myths? And it is from the Mediterranean world in which Jesus arrives. But we're so stuck, as you've mentioned, on looking at Jewish, as if it's divorced and separate, rather than seeing as it a cultural thing within the world of the Mediterranean. So I am a huge fan at trying to see that. And I've even hypothesized in my head, will we one day speak of Jesus like we do Hercules? Will we one day see him and the religion of Christianity like Greek mythology? I wonder.
Okay, I'm going to twist your arm a little bit,
Okay.
Derek. I think one of the huge differences about the gospel presentations of Jesus in Greek mythology has to do with the teachings of Jesus, most of which apparently come from a lost gospel Q. And mimesis criticism actually helps us identify materials that come out of Q. And that's why the volume 1 of the synopsis that we're talking about actually privileges my reconstruction of Q as being the first gospel.
Mhm.
And it's not written by a Christian, it's written by a Jew. There's no salvation by Jesus because of his crucifixion, or there's no resurrection. So, why is Jesus so cool? It's because he's making Jewish law more compatible and compassionate to people who are marginal in society. So this is where we get arguments with the Pharisees. This is where we get Jesus saying, I did not come to call the righteous, that is, those who obey the Torah. Well, I came to call sinners. And the law and the prophets were until John. After that, it's the kingdom of God. And that's in the sermon on the inaugural Sermon on the Mount. And the ethic of the kingdom of God is compassion, and the double love command, and so on. So I don't think it is fair to reduce Jesus to his mythological presentation. He's a Jewish teacher who gets mythologized.
Mhm.
But just as valuable, in my view, and in fact, ethically more valuable, are the ways that he tries to interpret Jewish law to make it more compatible. And of course, that's to others. And that's, of course, what Paul's about,
Mhm.
reevaluating Jewish law. And I think he gets that out of from the Jesus movement. So I'm so grateful for this discussion, because my work is sometimes used by mythicists to say that Jesus is myth. You just keep going, and Jesus himself is a myth. Well, I think that's really irresponsible to the scholarship that's been done on Q, on Jesus, and Palestinian Judaism, and Torah disputes, and early rabbinics, and so on. That surely the subject needs to have two keys. That is, the one key is the mythological key. That is the one we talk about in that people identify my work with. But the other key is to get Q right and to understand the Jewish origins of this material and to have a demythologized Jesus, if you will, that allows us to see him as a Jewish reformer.
Right. I'm with that, and I want to see that too. The only thing I think, and this is where you might agree with me, I don't know, I'd love to get your thoughts. I don't think that this guy would have been that important if he wasn't mythologized. So while
that's right.
So
you got that right.
I want to know what the guy said, what he did, what did he eat? Did he actually say this? Did he not? I'm curious to know if some of Paul's theology has somehow seeped into what we're finding as this Jewish reformer, or if Jesus himself really was like these are questions I have. But while I'm fascinated with that because I've actually worshiped the mythologized Jesus, I've really believed that. And of course, the worldview harmed me. The way that Paul describes the end is near, and like the hating of your flesh, and this life, if you gain it, you lose it. You need to lose this life. Take up your cross and follow me. Hard teachings that I really don't recommend personally, unless you interpret that in some radically different way than what I think they meant in martyrdom senses here early on. I'm saying I don't think the importance of Jesus would be there if it weren't for making him radically a God-like figure. So I think we agree.
Okay. Because somebody who dies on a cross is a loser. He's a cultural loser.
Right.
He's been marginal. People get crucified because they're marginal and they're troublemakers. So, and you recently actually had a podcast on disillusionment and the importance of mythologizing Jesus because of disillusionment. If you are a fan of Jesus as the Torah reformer and he dies on a cross, and you think that God should be involved in his career in some way, it'd be nice to get him raised from the dead, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So, and it's nice to have a mythology that places him in competitive posture with the Greek gods. So that's how I put it.
I think that I'm obsessed with trying to discover that guy, the real guy, because of the myth that made of course, yeah. They
Makes
were the
sense.
Same thing to me originally. And then now you go, hold on, you can actually parse out the two guys. Yeah. Now, I know some mythicists want to try and argue that they just borrowed from like Hillel and other Jewish rabbis to put that kind of material into the Gospels. But it's just more ad hoc to me and not Occam's razor to me. But then again, maybe I'm not omniscient and I don't know. But thank you, Chris, for that question. Grace 174 says, do you hold any conservative Bible scholar views?
Probably not, but I think the idea of conservative scholar views is so vast. Which scholar are we talking about? What do we mean by conservative and so on? Surely I can talk to a conservative Bible scholar and we can find things to talk about without slicing the other person's throat.
Right.
So, I think, by the way, scholarship is a discourse. It's not a fight.
It should be.
So we talk to each other, and but I probably don't have much in common with most conservative Bible scholars, but surely we can decide on something like what kind of pizza to have for lunch or something.
Thank you so much. Designer LLC, thank you. Much love to you both. I'm joining the Patreon.
Beautiful.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And be on the lookout to ask questions because I ask that our Patreon members, and I'll make a post about this to remind people, please try to make it one good question. I want to give everybody room to ask a question, and I don't want Dennis to croak over and die in my house because I worked him to death on asking all these questions. But I definitely will be recording it in 4K. Actually, on my Canon, I've got a Canon EOS R5C. It's a newer Canon camera, and we're going to be recording, Dennis, and it's going to be we're making history. It's gonna be beautiful. Thank you for that support. Exit Music says, so with Dr. MacDonald's work and Robin Faith Walsh's also, does he think that these Greek-educated gospel writers were feigning a Koine Greek style?
No, I don't. I think it was quite natural for them. And of course, the gospel authors have different Greek styles, so that Mark on the surface of it seems to be rather pedestrian. It has a relatively small vocabulary. And Luke comes along and he beautifies it, and then certainly beautifies it in the Acts of the Apostles. And
Right.
it really is competitive with Josephus in many of its passages. So I don't think they're feigning Koine Greek style. I think that's their Muttersprache.
Thank you so much, Exa Music. Bonton, Derek and Dennis, I appreciate you guys.
No, thank you, Bonton. We appreciate you, I guess. Yeah.
Get the book. I'm telling you, this book is going to change the game. You're going to see things you've never seen. JC, taught mimetic hybridity in school. Puzzle piece in place. Heard a lecture last night on Egyptology. Have you added that into mimesis too, or others?
I think mimesis is so widespread, JC, that we have to assume that it's the way that art was created, literary art. And in fact, you can see some of this mimesis in the art that's preserved in Egypt, where you have the certain themes that are reproduced but changed and so on. So I think that mimesis also is widespread in Europe. If one takes a look at the history of art and literature, there's a wonderful book on mimesis in Byzantium, and shows that it has to do with music, it has to do with art, it has to do with literature, it has to do with lots of things. I want to talk about the mimetic hybridity. Even antiquity, people were accused of plagiarism, that is, of mindless imitation. And there was a lot of mindless imitation in schools because people were learning how to compose by using certain literary models. So it does tend to be plagiaristic. But in order to be innovative, people were encouraged to use more than one model at a time. And the image that was used is of a bee that gathers pollen from several different flowers in order to make honey that is richer than the flavor of any one of the flowers and the pollen.
Huh.
And it was suggested that one would not use more than 5 models, but usually 2 or 3 were sufficient. And by using multiple models, you could protect yourself from charges of mindless plagiarism. And you could show that you are, in fact, more intelligent because you have access to more texts and you can integrate them in a different way. And you can take the best aspects of one thing and add it to another. So if one takes a look at Vergil's Aeneid, for example, it's loaded with hybridity all over the place. Sometimes it's Homer, sometimes it's occasionally Euripides, but usually not. But you have Latin Aeneas, the Latin epic author. You have some passages that remind one of Plato or Cicero, so or Lucretius, I should add. So mimetic hybridity was taught in school, but it also is characteristic. Let me give you an example. The Gospel of Matthew is a brilliant example of mimetic hybridity. In fact, I'm working on another book on this topic, which spills off of So what is Matthew about? He knows 2 Gospels. He knows the Q document and he knows Mark. And he's trying to put them together. And so he melds them in some cases, he integrates them in other cases, he uses biblical texts also as a way of creating more of a hybrid. And over again, If you take a look at a gospel parallel, not just mine, but other gospel parallels, you'll see how this hybridity works. And it really makes Matthew much more sophisticated than most stories of antiquity.
Wow. And I imagine he does so with other literature than just the Hebrew Bible, but he really capitalizes on comparing Jesus to Moses. But thank you, JC.
Yeah.
Doc Pleuromenot, does Marx executed Jesus echo Socrates or the executed just man in Plato's Republic? So a common on hidden injustice and corruption of society, hence calling for social improvement, change.
Doc, I think if I were to change Marx to Luke's, I think you're right on target. Does Luke's executed Jesus echo Socrates or the executed just man in Plato's Republic? Yes, yes, yes. Mark doesn't. Mark's Jesus is dying as a loser like Hector. Luke, that's Mark's Jesus. Luke comes along and he makes Jesus's death much more like Socrates. So, for example, Jesus is surrounded by his disciples at the cross. He forgives the person who is executing him, just like Socrates forgives the person who is giving him the hemlock. Jesus has a confidence of the afterlife. So he tells the righteous thief, today you'll be with me in paradise, which is similar to what you find in the Phaedo. Not the Republic, but in the Phaedo, Socrates is telling his comrades that if they keep the soul pure, they too will have a blissful hereafter. And I could go on about it. To be the emphasis on Jesus as being dikaios, just, I find this person to be innocent, Pilate says 3 times. That would be the judgment that one would want to have had from the Athenians as they tried Socrates. So, Doc, you're really smart about the Socrates, the Plato's Republic, and the just man business. But I think that's Luke's agenda more than Marx.
Thank you so much, Doc. Great question.
Yeah, no kidding.
And yes, Doc is definitely up there, and I really appreciate his input. Mausian, forgive me, like him, love your work on Jesus making Judaism softer and open to more. Is the double-edged sword the baggage of anti-Semitism that came out of that as well?
Yes, and that's so tragic that Jesus is he wants to make sure that Mosaic law gets treated well by making it more tolerable for the marginal in society. So Jesus is in the Gospel of the Logoi of Jesus, or the Q document, a new Moses. The Q document is a rewriting of Deuteronomy to say that the promised prophet like Moses in Deuteronomy now is available. And so what's going on? His interpretation of the law is much more congenial to others in society. So there will be people, this is in the Q document. In other words, it's in Matthew and Luke. That there will be people in the kingdom of God who do not obey every commandment in the Mosaic law. What should they obey? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and your neighbors yourself. That's enough. That's enough to live. Now, should you obey the other commandments? Yes, you should. But you Pharisees are nasty enforcers of Torah on people who can no longer endure it. By the way, the famous story of Jesus forgiving the adulterous woman appears in my reconstruction of Q. Jesus, the elders say, Moses said we should stone women like this. What do you think? And Jesus rewrites the law, not in stone, but on the ground. And then he says, if you're without sin, cast the first stone. No one can do it. And Jesus tells her to go. She never repents. There's nothing about repentance in this story. It's Jesus's forgiveness. His attitude toward the law is is softer. What happens then in the tradition is that his arguments with Pharisees over the law makes him a Christian and not a Jew. And Jesus was a Jew who had a Hillel-like attitude toward the law to make it more flexible and liberal. Jesus was a liberal like Socrates who got killed for making a mess of their society, right? And he's like Martin King, or he's like Cesar Chavez, or he's like Mahatma Gandhi. They're not illegal. They're trying to make the law work for the socially marginal. And what happens with Christians, and this is really important, isn't it, Derek?
Yeah.
What happens with Christians is this attitude against Pharisees becomes attitude toward all Jews. Yeah. And that Christians then are the saviors of the true law of God. Well, come on, get over it.
Yeah, this happens. You talk about social identity and stuff. The split that happens between Jews and early Christian Jews.
It's awful.
Yeah, and then now you have Gentiles that are really in this. So there's a sharp distinction that happens, and I think by the time John is in its final form, you find those layers like you're describing, where I would say a Greek audience or Gentile audience is really capitalizing on all the Judaios fitting into this category. That could be an interpretation. I mean, but it's obvious in history. You have another scholar in the chat right now, Dr. James Tabor. And he's so number one, he's a patron of Myth Vision. Number two, we've got courses coming out on the Gospel of Mark with him. So he and you, like, we all need to talk more.
And we're friends. So
yes.
Hey James.
He says this is truly a great presentation, Dennis. Can't wait to get a hold of a copy. As you know, I studied with Jonathan Z. Smith and Morton Smith, who taught me to go beyond typical New Testament exegesis.
And you certainly have. You've had a whole career of doing that.
Yes.
So yeah. Well, I'll be eager to know any critical comments you have. I'd value them.
I definitely can't wait to get his thoughts. He says more basic than, and I'm going to butcher every one of these names. You might as well read this.
More basic than Schopenhauer is Richard Wittgenstein, Hellenistische Wundererzählungen. Schopenhauer, well, yeah, I think that's right. Hellenistic wonder or miracle stories, we would say, something like that. Yeah, well, the difference with Wittgenstein and myself would be that he would be more interested in the miracle stories as a genre. And I think what we have in the Gospels is not just miracle stories as a genre, but targeted texts of the Greek deities performing wonders, heroes performing wonders that can be improved by Jesus in these tales. But thanks for that learned comment.
James, we got some work to do, and that course is coming out while I had you here. Got to let you know. Gospel of Mark course by James Tabor is coming out soon. This is a reminder to you, James. Ryan's waiting for you to write her back. So we've got so much going on, Dennis, here at Myth Vision, from courses to getting this book out there today. This was like last minute. I had received this today, found it in my living room this morning, and I looked at Ryan and I said, honey, why didn't you tell me this came in? And she goes, oh, we just came in today. And I was like, oh, snap. Dennis, we need to talk about this. We need to get this on Myth Vision immediately.
You're sweet. Thank you.
Absolutely. Are there any final words from you? We got 420 people here. I'd like to know if anybody liked this, or has actually, a better question is, have you got the book? If you have purchased this book on Amazon, type a 1 in the chat. I want to see you. I want to recognize you. If you've got this book on Amazon, type a 1. If you haven't, type a 2. I want to see what people say in the chat here as we are closing out this. No more super chats. Dennis, tell us some more about this book, just briefly, what we need, why we need it, and I'll be looking for those 1s and 2s in the chat and popping them on the screen.
It really would be important to understand that this is a reference work and it's not an argument. It's not sustained. It's think of having a gospel parallel that takes care of the four basic problems that we have in usual gospel parallels. One is that it includes texts that were written by non-Christians and non-Jews, that is, archaic poetry, as a part of the literary context of the ancient world. The second is that it treats the lost gospel cue and puts it in a parallel column with the other gospels. Another problem is all other gospel parallels have a canonical order, that is Matthew, Mark, Luke. This is a synopsis that has 4 columns, and they're in chronological order, Q, Mark, Matthew, Luke, which allows you to read across the page and to see how the tradition develops. And then the Gospel of John is treated by itself in its compositional stages, and it has its own challenges. So this is a reference work. It's not a monograph that some people are going to plow through it because they're just fascinated by this stuff as much as I am. But it's better to put it on your shelf right next to another gospel parallel, especially if you can read Greek. My stuff's in English. It's not in Greek, and it should be. But I know that would limit the readership and the impact of it. But use it as a reference work, and I'd love to know what people think of it. And by the way, people are going to find mistakes in it. So if there are mistakes or it can be improved, let me know, because this is on print on demand. And what that means is at any time I can make changes and improve it. So I don't have to wait for a second edition. We can get it done right away.
This won't come out on audiobook, right? Someone asked.
It really is not congenial to an audiobook, but I do have plans to make one of my books, in fact, Mythologizing Jesus, an audiobook. So we'll see.
Well, we got a lot of 1s and 2s. People haven't ordered it yet, a lot of them, but some have. And of course, James Tabor says his copy comes in Saturday, nice Xmas Eve reading. So Christmas.
Oh, thanks, James. Yeah.
Absolutely. I hope people will go. We have 420 people around.
I have one thing to say to James.
Yeah.
James, I was so sorry to hear about the death of your son. And that still is fresh for you, and it is for me. I enjoyed meeting him so much. He was such a talented person, and I know your attachment to him was so profound. So I grieved with you for a while afterwards. I should have sent you a note.
Thank you for that comment there. And yeah, appreciate that sentimental. So thank you, Dennis, for your time and coming in here and discussing your work. I'm really looking forward to seeing people give you Amazon reviews. James says, thanks, Dennis. Yes, we had such a wonderful time in Vienna. I have pictures.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's good to end on this note here, Dennis. I think we have a lot of work to do getting you here so we can record about this, getting Patreon questions, of course, that are going to ask specific questions. And if things don't get covered, I will improvise, or you and me will brainstorm about covering some of that to promote this work and to get these ideas out there in the general public and to pierce into the Guild of Scholarship. So I really appreciate you. I hope people will get the work. I had to drop this out here. We had about 420 people watching live. And I hope everybody enjoys the holidays as well, especially you. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Derek. Greetings, everyone. Merry Christmas.
Yes, Merry Christmas. Like the video, share the video, drop a comment. Get the book.
Yeah.
Let us know what you think. And join the Patreon as well so we can ask some of your questions. And never forget, we
are Myth Vision.
Myth Vision. That's right.